Jesus Christ, our Savior, offers.
John Paul points out in those catecheses that he gave over the first 5 years or so of his pontificate that with the incarnation, the body enters theology by the front door. So we have to take the body seriously. We're not minds trapped in bodies, like some kind of Cartesian thinking machines, right? We are embodied persons. So the body expresses the person. Whereas gender ideology tries to drive this wedge between the body and a self-chosen gender, the theology of the body says, no, we are integral subjects, and our sexually differentiated bodies are integral to who we are as persons. The biggest academic study we have to date, done by the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, found the rate of suicide among people who have fully transitioned chemically and surgically to be 19 times higher than the population as a whole. How is that good medical care? This is activism masquerading as science. What we've done is given people the opportunity to reach out for medicalized self-harm. Ultimately, I do think the deepest roots here are spiritual, right? This is a spiritual battle, and people who are confused about their own identity, more often than not, it's because they're confused about their relationship with God, and they don't know they have a Father in heaven who loves them.
Dr. Grabowski, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to see you.
Great to be with you, Conor.
I want to start by telling you a story about how Scott Hahn explained you to me one night at dinner. So I was with Dr. Hahn at dinner with a number of people, and I mentioned you were one of our authors, and he said very directly, he said, Dr. John Grabowski is one of the most influential theologians in the country. And I said, really? Tell me why you say that. And he said, because Catholic U had really lost its way years ago in the 60s and 70s, and it struggled. And right when they were trying to recover from that, they hired this young theologian, Dr. John Grabowski. And ever since then, he has really led the way in reforming and bringing that theological school back into the heart of the church. He gave you a lot of credit for that. So coming from Dr. Scott Hahn, boy, that's quite a feather in your cap.
That was very kind of him. I think he probably oversold me. I would give more of the credit to Father David O'Connell, third president of CUA while I was there, who I think really kind of turned the ship. Because when I got to Catholic U, it really was a ship without a rudder. It was the place everyone disliked. Faithful Catholics because they had someone like Father Charles Kern on their faculty to begin with.
Yes.
Liberal Catholics because they had caved into the Vatican and fired Father Kern. So CUA was just the place everyone loved to hate. And I think it was Father, now Bishop O'Connell, who really got there and said, this is not who we are. We have a Catholic identity. We have a long, excellent academic history. That's who we are. And that's who we're going to be. So... But that was very kind of Scott.
We're going to talk about transgenderism in the book you wrote for us, Unraveling Gender, the Battle Over Sexual Difference. But first, tell us a little bit about your theological background and kind of how all of the work you've done kind of positioned you to be able to write something like this.
So in graduate school, the aforementioned Scott Hahn, not Dr. Scott Hahn at that point, fellow graduate student with me, was one of the first people I heard to start to talk about this thing called the theology of the body of Pope John Paul II. He mentioned it in a doctoral seminar we were taking together. And my ears pricked up and I was intrigued. So I started to read more and more John Paul II, who was Pope at the time, and was just captivated by his understanding of the human person. And wanted to know more, wanted to learn more, wanted to kind of follow his sources to their source. And so that led me down a path. I initially entertained the idea, we've been talking about dissertations of late, of writing a dissertation on John Paul II's theological anthropology. And a number of friends in graduate school, including Scott Hahn, said to me, well, you want to think about how that's going to position you for the academic job market. And I thought that was prudent advice. So I ended up casting my net more widely and wrote a dissertation on theological anthropology and gender in Catholic theology since the Second Vatican Council. So I did everything from feminist thought through transcendental Thomism, through kind of Catholic romantic theology, Louis Bouillet, Hans von Balthasar, and John Paul II. So he was an integral piece, but only a piece in this. So the human person and sexual difference was my dissertation topic at CUA. At Marquette, where and then I was hired at CUA, and at Catholic U back in the early 90s when I started, the advice was don't publish your dissertation. You've got to publish journal articles to get tenure. Forget the dissertation. So I had finished the dissertation and put it on the shelf. And so plunged into writing articles on moral theology, on marriage and family, on a variety of things. Some on John Paul II and theological anthropology. That interest never left me. But in recent years, or more recently, a number of things happened that kind of caused me to say, maybe it's time I updated my dissertation research and got it out. And especially the phenomenon of gender ideology really caused me to, and being told by, I went to the 2015 Synod on Family and talked to bishops from all over the world. And over again, I heard, gender ideology, what is this? Where is it coming from? How do we respond to it within the church? So that kind of lit a fire under me of saying, I need to go back to that research that I did and bring it to bear on this issue.
So when you were doing your dissertation, were you envisioning that there would be something called transgenders, or did we even have that word? I mean, you grew up maybe hearing about a cross-dresser,
sure.
but what if your dissertation wasn't dealing with like transgenders? Kind of what was it dealing with?
So it was dealing with the question of how deep does sexual difference go within the human person? Is it just like a superficial biological facet of who we are, which is the position taken by a lot of second wave feminist thinkers, and some Catholic theologians kind of went down that same route? Is it kind of these eternal archetypes, kind of Platonic forms that we somehow instantiate, making us seemingly almost two different species from one another? And I realized, well, that can't be right, because what isn't assumed isn't redeemed. So Christ, in assuming human nature, redeems both men and women. So we don't want to divide the sexes on the level of nature. So what's the mediating position between those two? And I think what I came to, and this is my reading of John Paul II, sexual difference is accidental on the level of our nature. There's only one human nature that men and women have equally, but it's essential on the level of actually existing persons. Mm-hmm. So it's therefore an intrinsic difference. So any one human being will only be male or female and can't be both, certainly. So that was the subject matter I wrestled with in the dissertation, which I think positioned me well to start thinking about issues like, first of all, intersex, because a lot of people think one argument against the Catholic understanding of sexual difference is, well, there's this third category, which is neither male nor female, which is false, right? Every human being is either male or female, and we can read the body of intersex people as either male or female. We just have to read more carefully and read more closely. But then
do you mean genetically?
Well, genetically, but there's a variety of different intersex conditions. Some of them are genetically based, some of them are hormonally based, and they have different manifestations. But we can still read the body of those people as organized. There is a Dominican biologist by the name of Father Nicanor Austriaco.
Oh, yeah.
Who
Yeah.
I had him in class some years ago.
Wow.
But brilliant.
Yeah, renowned.
PhD from in biology from MIT, doctorate in theology from Freiburg. But Father Austriaco says there are two tests we can use to read the body of a person with an intersex condition. First, is this body organized to reproduce as a man or a woman? Is it organized to generate spermatozoa or ova, right? And if that fails, because some people who have intersex conditions are infertile, right? Then the second question he proposes is, would this person, with their physiology, engage in the conjugal act as a man or as a woman? Mm-hmm. So every intersex condition can be read in light of those two tests. But again, that's different from the idea that a gender identity is a self-chosen thing independent of the body and sex, which is something that's different altogether, but intersex has been used as kind of a wedge issue to quote unquote explode the gender binary.
Yes. So you started off by saying your dissertation kind of was like, how deep does this gender ideology go?
Where do we locate sexual difference in the human person?
Right. And so, so what I heard you say is that it goes to the essence of each person. Mm-hmm. But we don't have separate natures like angels, right? Every angel has a different nature, which is really hard for me to grasp, right?
Yes.
And especially when you hear the 9 choirs of angels, you kind of think that they would fit in a category of nature, but they don't. They all have their own nature. Mm-hmm. So if by the way, do I say sex or gender? Like if I'm talking about this, like I get so whacked out on this. I don't know.
I think these days, stay with the word sex as much as you can.
Right.
Because sex is rooted in the body.
Right. Okay. So
don't create it.
Right. So if I'm trying to get to like how deep the issue of sex goes in the human soul, mm-hmm. right? So it goes to the essence of who we are as individuals, but it's not so strong that it creates a new nature. That's what I heard you say. Mm-hmm. So then it's proper to say that like my soul is male.
If the soul is the form of the body, then right. It's not your body that's determining you being male primarily. It has to be your soul, right? So
my soul is the formal cause, my body's the material cause.
That's St. Thomas Aquinas, right?
Okay.
So if we are body soul composites, I don't think we are genderless souls,
right?
I think there's a way in which the formality of the soul as male or female is manifested in the body.
Yeah. Now, how did the whole gender ideology or transgender movement, I'm not sure which one I want to say, how did it get started philosophically, or I think more philosophically than theologically? What are the roots to this? If you go back,
how far back do you want to go?
Eve ate the apple. I don't know. I don't know. However far back you want to go. But in your book, you give some great explanation of existentialism and whatnot, and how we really started drawing these distinctions or separating, our actual, what God created from what we want to become. So, but how did this movement kind of begin in the modern world?
The modern iteration, yeah, sure. And Pope Benedict XVI points us toward existentialist thought, right? He, in his final Christmas address to the Roman Curia, December of 2012, he talks about Simone de Beauvoir, this feminist existentialist thinker who said, one isn't born a woman, one is made a woman by the culture, right? So for Beauvoir and others who think like her, sex is what you're born with. It's your physiology. Gender is then imposed on you by a culture, and that's all the masculine, feminine sex roles. But Benedict goes on in that same address to the Curia to say, well, but now in the 21st century, we have this idea that gender is self-chosen, right? So I choose a gender for myself. It's not imposed on me by the culture. And my gender is what I want it to be, and it isn't necessarily grounded in my body. So we've moved beyond just the existentialist denial of human nature here. I think another contributing influence is Marxism, right? Because insofar as Marx and Engels, toward the end of their career, argued for the abolition of marriage and the family, right? Because they saw it as an instrument, a tool of oppression, especially the oppression of women. But if you abolish sexual difference, you have abolished the family.
Yes.
There is no family if gender is a self-chosen reality. And I think the final philosophical piece is postmodern thought. So these are people like Judith Butler, right, who basically hold that both sex and gender are performance. They're things we perform in a social context. They have no rootedness in our body. They have no rootedness in the way our bodies are shaped or made. So it's all a self-chosen, self-articulated reality. The thing that I didn't get to in the book, and I think someone needs to tell this story, is how that went from in the first decade and maybe early part of the second decade of our century to an idea held by like a small group of academics to suddenly the mainstream in the culture. And I think what happened was social media, right? Tumblr and Facebook and later TikTok, right? Which kind of took these ideas and pumped them out into the mainstream of the culture so that instead of just a small group of academics talking about this in university classes, it suddenly became widespread in popular culture.
I mean, it seems like they were primed for this by really the philosophy of relativism just permeating culture. I mean, really, objective truth got booted, back in the 60s or earlier? I mean, but
sure.
I mean, so like young people particularly really did fall in love with the idea of they can choose whether this is a human life or not. They can choose whether they're going to be gay or not. Like it was a very much a relativist mindset just started sweeping through culture. So as soon as somebody introduced the idea, well, if you can choose all these things, you can choose your own gender, it was perfectly logical and easy to accept.
Sure. And again, I think existentialism, Marxism, postmodern thought all play a role in that relativism that you're describing. They're all kind of different foundations, and that's a pun, because postmodernism rejects any foundations. Right?
Okay.
But they all contribute to that wider relativism.
Hey guys, real quick, we noticed 80% of you that watch the episodes are not subscribed. So please do me the favor and subscribe and hit the bell for notification. That helps you get the content, but it also helps this amazing stuff get spread to other people just like you. Thanks for your help. Now let's dive back in. Now going a little philosophically, getting a little nerdy here, Jean-Paul Sartre, in your book, you say that he taught that existence precedes essence. And this is like the quintessential existentialism, right? And so we hear that word a lot. Can you kind of help explain, like, what does that mean? What does he mean by existence precedes essence? Now, I'm used to Thomas Aquinas, so I see these two things going hand in hand with us, but maybe you can encapsulate all of that and how that became a foundational philosophical point that this woke ideology was able to clasp onto. Yeah.
I mean, take another of Sartre's quotes, and that is, there is no human nature because there's no God who could have invented it.
Yes.
Right? So therefore, if we don't have a nature, if we don't have an essence, then we exist, but it's in a meaningless universe. So we have to assign a meaning to our own existence and kind of invent truth for ourselves.
So he would say that existence is like a blank canvas.
Exactly.
And the essence is like what you are. Like existence is just that you are. And the essence is that like what you are.
But essence then is self-chosen. It's self-assigned. It's not, It's not something given to you by God, which is when you're in a Thomistic framework, that's what you're thinking, right? I have a human nature, which God gave me. God holds me in existence. I can not be. Only God cannot be. cannot. Anyway,
Right, it's hard.
Yeah,
Yeah,
God has to exist.
God has to exist.
Let's put it like that.
Only God cannot not be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's it.
Right.
You need the double negative. So, I mean, Sartre is he's denying any whatness to our common human nature. Right? That's not a reality. So we are a blank slate.
If we're a blank slate, then whenever we have consciousness and we want to start choosing what we are, we're really playing God. Like, that's why you have to get rid of God. That's the connection between like the existentialist or the Marxist. Like, to liberate self, you have to get rid of God.
Absolutely.
That's the way they see it.
Absolutely. Because God's a threat to this self-defining but undefined human freedom that we are. Yeah. God's the opponent to that.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned in this book, I love this, about confusing the language, and you quote the Tower of Babel. And here, I want to talk about the difference of the terminology, sex and gender. So as you point out, I think in a footnote, footnotes are always my favorite part of the book, but anybody who takes Latin knows that there's like masculine, feminine, and neutral genders to a word. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know, but 100 years ago, did we refer to those as genders for words? And then we had sex, which was referring obviously to a person's sex. Like, is that where historically, what did the word gender mean versus sex? That's what I'm trying to get to. I mean, it was a grammatical term for at least some period of time, I think.
Sure, and still is, although some languages have up to 16 genders. I think Swahili does, for example. But gender was also used as kind of a polite synonym for sex, because in polite company, you don't talk about sex. Right. So if you ask a person their sex, it might be construed as something other than what you intended. So you say gender instead.
I'm kind of curious where that word, how we started using that word at all. I mean, was it always used synonymous with sex, or was it just relegated to things like the endings of words in Latin?
It's a great question, and you'd have to do a deeper dive historically to really, I think, answer it well. Okay. But it didn't start inheriting technical connotations until the mid-20th century and existentialist feminism, the beginning of second wave feminism, when it was, again, sex is the biological that you're born with. Gender is what the culture assigns as to what that means. And then that's when we started making this sharp distinction between the two.
It's kind of brilliant. I mean, seriously, like liberals always control language much better than we do. They do this all the time.
Margaret Sanger changed the language from contraception to birth control. And that's part of how she won the public argument, at least among Protestant churches, because birth control sounds innocuous. Yeah. Contraception, well, that sounds like you're acting against conception, which is what you're doing.
Pro-choice sounds better than pro-abortion.
It does.
Planned Parenthood sounds better than anti-baby or whatever. I don't know.
Margaret Sanger's eugenics program, which is what it was.
Eugenics program doesn't.
That doesn't have a nice ring to it.
That doesn't populate well on Google,
Populate. Yes, I see what you did.
Oh, good.
There.
I didn't even mean the pun. Oh, wow,
but you did.
All right. So, yeah, okay. So, but they got control of this language of gender versus sex. They distort the name gender. They start using it for like this, however I want to perceive my sexual identity. And they win. They win the cultural language game. Mm-hmm. And you relate this to the Tower of Babel, which I just thought was kind of a brilliant comparison.
Well, I mean, whenever we try to understand or define ourselves apart from God or over against God, we sow confusion in ourselves. That's what that story in Genesis 11 indicates, right? We build this great big tower so we can go toe to toe with God, right? We don't need you, God, because we can look you in the eye now. And all that hubris does is divide us, create confusion among us in our languages. And gender ideology doesn't just stop with confusing our understanding of sex and gender, because it goes to we're going to invent these whole new pronouns that don't correspond to either sex, that are just made up words. So we have this multiplication of words with no meaning. And if that isn't Babel, I don't know what is.
We have 100. Didn't a national organization or some international organization came up with 100 genders?
Well, there is a UN treaty that is being debated in one of the UN committees or subgroups that would recognize over 100 genders and make it a human rights violation to fail to do so.
I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say.
In California, you could face jail time if you intentionally misgender someone.
Oh my gosh.
In New York City, you could be fined for doing that. So, yeah, welcome to our brave new world.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, I think Facebook has 70, I think, on something like that.
About 8 or 9 years ago, they gave 70 options to their users, and if one of those doesn't fit, you can build your own.
Yeah. It's
so
incredible.
There's no end to the confusion we create.
Yeah. So, what kind of what's going on in somebody's soul when they become transgender? I mean, like, they're a victim of something. Like, you feel sorry for these people. I see these people. They look mentally ill. You feel sorry for them. But the idea of a cross-dresser or something has always been around, like, since the beginning of time. Like, there's always been something, but this has clearly become contagious, and it's spreading like a virus, and it's just bizarre. So, what do you think? What do you think's going on in somebody's heart and mind when this stuff occurs? I mean, you must have thought about this, given all your research.
I mean, I think where this started a few generations ago is there have always been people who have struggled with accepting the reality of their body as it is, right? So some kind of confusion about personal identity. So an anorexic struggles, that's a form of body dysmorphic disorder. They have a false perception of their body. They think they are grossly overweight when in fact they're dangerously thin, right? So it used to be that gender confusion, when it reached a clinical level, it was called gender identity disorder. And there were two primary recommendations given by psychologists, psychiatrists, medical doctors. One, watchful waiting, because all the studies show that 85% or more of children who struggle with a discordant gender identity will outgrow it by the time they get to adulthood. So why intervene? If it's a really serious condition or debilitating in some way, then the recommendation was for gender affirming therapy, to have appropriate psychological intervention help to accept a boy, to help a boy accept the reality of his body, the blessings of being a boy, to help a girl accept the reality of her body and the blessings that come with being a girl, right? And a lot of times this involves working on relationships between parent and child, father and son, mother and daughter, right? As well as, having the right peers and playmates, playing, appropriate games, just reinforcing the goodness of the reality of the body as given. But a decade or a little over a decade ago, activists decided they didn't like the language of disorder because you're stigmatizing people. You can't do that. So we're going to give it a new name. We're going to call it gender dysphoria. And we're going to say that the appropriate response, the appropriate care to this could include socially transitioning the child, allowing them to adopt the pronouns and dress of the opposite sex, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and even surgical modification of the body. This is activism masquerading as science, because what the science actually shows is what we've done is given people the opportunity to reach out for medicalized self-harm, because this doesn't resolve the underlying trauma that people go through about gender confusion. This would be the equivalent of someone who's struggling with anorexia, another form of body dysmorphic disorder, putting them on appetite suppressants and giving them liposuction, right? Because we're going to cure you by kind of catering to your false perception of yourself. Since when did that become good medicine? since when is that appropriate care of someone who's actually struggling here? So this should evoke compassion, but it should also evoke good evidence-based medical care. And that's not what we have. That's not what the APA or the Endocrine Society or or the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, all these professional bodies are pushing right now. And the interesting thing is there are other countries, very secular countries like the UK and the Scandinavian countries and France and New Zealand and Australia that are starting to restrict these procedures for children because they actually are looking at the data and saying, wait, the outcomes for people who chemically and surgically transition are terrible. Health-wise, psychologically, the biggest academic study we have to date, done by the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, found the rate of suicide among people who have fully transitioned chemically and surgically to be 19 times higher than the population as a whole. How is that good medical care? Right? It's not. So we've got to stop thinking that the way to treat what is best understood as a psychological struggle is to try to treat it medically with, it's the literal square peg in a round hole. It just does not work.
How does the theology of the body, I have an idea of what that whole thing is, but I've never studied it, right? I think everybody recognizes the term. Yeah. We know that John Paul II gave these addresses on Wednesdays, and I guess all of that became his theology of the body textbook, sort of, something like that. I was close, right? Close enough. All right. Something like that. What is it in that that's separate from just like teachings in the catechism or something, that what's unique to that body of work that he did that would address something like this transgenderism? What is it that, how does being a theology of the body expert help you deal with this, other than just like, no offense, but like common sense,
None taken.
Right.
Good theology builds upon good common sense, right?
Yes.
So those are not opposed to one another. So the theology of the body, couple of general thoughts here, I guess. John Paul points out in those catecheses that he gave over the first 5 years or so of his pontificate that with the incarnation, the body enters theology by the front door because the Son of God assumed a human body, right? The Son of God took on a male body. So the body is part of how God has communicated himself to us in the second person of the Blessed Trinity. So we have to take the body seriously. And he gives us this catechesis, and what he's doing is basically it is a biblical understanding of the human person. And he looks at the human person from the vantage of creation, the fall, and redemption. And he points out that in creation, right, everything God does, everything God makes is a gift, right? If we want to understand ourselves, we have to understand ourselves, our existence. God doesn't owe us existence, back to essence and existence, right? Our existence is a gift. And God creates us, and he creates us as rational beings, capable of knowing him, of choosing him, of loving him. And yet, as wonderful as that is, the text of God says in Genesis 2:18, it's not good for the man to be alone. In other words, we can't fulfill God's purpose for us as solitary beings. It's only when God casts this deep covenant sleep on the man, takes out one of his ribs, builds it into a woman, the man responds by saying, this one is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. This one will be called woman because out of man she's been taken. The interesting thing here is in the Hebrew text, up to this point, he's only been called Adam, human, or the man in the generic sense. But now we have the gender-specific terms, man, ish, woman, isha. This one shall be called Isha because out of ish she's been taken. So we discover the meaning of our own body only in light of the other sex. I discover what it is to be man in light of woman. Woman discovers what it is to be woman in light of man. John Paul calls that the spousal meaning of the body. So our bodies as sexually differentiated reveal that we're ordered to one another and to God in a relationship of gift, right? We are, the thing that fulfills us ultimately is the ability to make a gift of ourselves in love. And as human beings, we always and only do that through our bodies, right? And that's true in marriage. It's true in religious life or priesthood. You make a gift of yourself, the whole of your life through your body, right? And to give the body is to give the person. So we're not, think minds trapped in bodies, like some kind of Cartesian, thinking machines, right? We are embodied persons. So if I'm going to know and to love as a human being, I come to know the world around me and others around me through my body. And I give myself in love to family, to friends, to my spouse, to God through my body. So the body expresses the person. So whereas gender ideology tries to drive this wedge between the body and a self-chosen gender, the theology of the body says, no, we are integral subjects, and our sexually differentiated bodies are integral to who we are as persons. And we can only think and act and love with our bodies.
Do you know if John Paul II spoke or wrote at all about transgenderism specifically?
He did. As a professional philosopher in Love and Responsibility, Karol Wojtyła.
That's going back a ways.
It was written in Polish in 1960. But he talked about, to use a term we talked about a little bit earlier over lunch, hermaphroditism,
okay,
right? By which he meant intersex conditions, right? There are people whose bodily expression of sex difference is ambiguous in some way, but he insisted, and in fact, there's also a text in the Theology of the Body Catechesis where he talks about there's a certain way in which being a body is prior to being sexed or being aware. In other words, as a human being, I can only be an embodied person. I'm not an angel, right? I'm not a spiritual person. So there's a givenness to our body, and both men and women are embodied beings. But then there's the further later discovery of sex, especially in going out from myself and giving myself in relationship to others. A further insight that the theology of the body gives us, related to your last question as well, is he writes at one point, man becomes the image of God by entering into communion. In other words, by giving oneself in love to enter into marriage, to enter into a religious life, we reflect God, who is an eternal communion of persons, an eternal communion of love of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So we don't just image God in the powers of our soul, our intellect, memory, and will, which is kind of the classical psychological analogy for the image of God. We also image God by going out from ourselves in love, by making a gift of ourselves in love as embodied persons.
But God doesn't have a body. I mean, the second person of the Trinity does.
That's right.
So help me with that. I mean, like, how, when we talk about the image and likeness of God,
yeah,
how does the body fit in that? Because God doesn't have a body.
Sure. And God, even though we will call God Father and Son, right? As John Paul writes in his document Mulieris Dignitatem on the dignity and vocation of women, doesn't mean God has biological sex. God is a spiritual reality that transcends biological sexuality. So what we need to recall here is the teaching of the Fourth Lateran Council, right? The doctrine of analogy. Whenever I use the same word to describe God and human beings, there is both similarity but even greater dissimilarity. So, right, so God is a communion of persons in a far more real and total way than any loving human marriage or human community or religious community could ever be. But there is a real analogical connection. I'm not using these words in a completely dissimilar way. So no, God does not have a body, but God is an eternal communion of persons in love. And we are persons as well. We're different from God. We are embodied persons, right? Although the Son of God assumes a human nature with a human body in the incarnation and now possesses that glorified human body in heaven, which is the cause of our being able to participate in the sacraments and receive sacramental grace. It's Christ's crucified and glorified human body. Thomas teaches that's the instrumental cause of all the efficacy of the sacraments.
Yeah. So people have debated whether, if we had not sinned, whether God would have become man, right? They've been discussing that for a
Blessed
long.
Duns Scotus, pray for us.
Right. So I read that he would have, because the glory of the incarnation was even a greater thing than redemption of man. So, and so like when God became flesh, it elevated creation, I guess all of creation, in a way that
Particularly human creation.
Yeah. So it seems like that incarnation kind of did something to human nature that dignified it all the more.
Absolutely.
And therefore even further dignifies the human body and our sexual identity tied with our body, right? I could see how the incarnation is sort of at the core of a true Christian anthropology.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are a number of theologians who've speculated, and some theologians speculated that was the cause of Satan's fall, is that Satan refused to acknowledge a God that would lower himself to assume a human nature with a human body in the incarnate. And it's interesting speculation. And, and that's all that it is. St. Thomas Aquinas says, I'm not going to go there because the scriptures don't give us clarity here, so I'm just not going to speculate. It's a theological opinion hypothesis that we can entertain and think about. But your point, I think, is sound regardless, and that is, yes, it shows us the dignity of human nature and the dignity of the human body, how seriously God takes his creation, the human body, that he would assume it for our salvation in the incarnation. John Paul wrote in his first encyclical that in the incarnation, Christ united himself to every human person. So in other words, every human person has a nature that has been hypostatically united to the Son of God. Now, not all human beings are aware of that fact, right? Which is why we're called to evangelize others, so that other people can know that amazing good news, right? But the truth is, human nature has been dignified, has been given this path to sharing in divine life through the incarnation. We who have Christian faith are fortunate enough to know that reality.
Yeah. Did Benedict continue the work of John Paul II in these areas, and did he specifically address transgenderism?
I mentioned his 2012 Christmas address to the Roman Curia, which is, I think, one of the clearest statements we've gotten from the church on this, although Pope Francis has something very similar in Amoris Laetitia, and says, that was an issue he was very clear about through his pontificate.
But at the same time, he's criticized a lot for welcoming LGBTQ communities into the Vatican. Like, he seemed to, I don't know what the word is, hang out with them a lot. I mean, so what do you do with that?
Well, I mean, you can draw different conclusions. If you want to try to understand that as charitably as you can, you could say, well, Jesus was accused of the same thing.
Yeah.
Associating with tax collectors and sinners. But
his written words on it are clean,
crystal clear.
Okay.
Pope Francis called gender ideology one of the ugly ideologies of our time.
Okay.
But to your original question, Connor, I think Benedict's first encyclical, Deus Caritas Est, God is Love, is in a sense kind of a systematization of a lot of what John Paul gave us in the Theology of the Body.
Okay.
Talking about the inseparable connection in divine and authentic human love between agape, sacrificial self-gift, and eros, that passionate desire for union. And Benedict talks about how in the Eucharist we have the perfect kind of synthesis of both, right? We have the fruit of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, the meal of the new covenant made available to us, but we also have God desiring literally to become one with us and to fill our souls with his grace. So yes, did Benedict continue and build on John Paul II's anthropology? I think he did.
Yeah. What is Leo the 14th going to have to, in regards to this issue, what's he going to have to deal with? What's he going to have to write about? Like what? I mean, because this issue in society is not going away anytime soon. So it's got to be on the papacy's mind.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't want to attribute words to our new Holy Father who hasn't yet spoken them. But I mean, you're right, it's not going away, but there was just a study released that indicated the rate of people on college campuses identifying as transgender has dropped dramatically in the last couple of years. So we may have seen the tide kind of crest, please God, on this issue, so that some of this confusion may be abating on the part of younger people. I mean, I agree. I think Leo XIV is going to have to continue to address this. I hope he is as clear as his three predecessors, although really two, because John Paul II really didn't deal with gender ideology. I mean, I think his analysis of the culture of death versus the culture of life in Evangelium Vitae, he saw what was coming,
right?
But he didn't quite address this head on, whereas Benedict and Francis did. But I think one new thing that Pope Leo is going to add to the mix is the question of AI, right? And what do we do with intelligence that seems to be, growing toward human-like proportions, but is clearly not the intelligence of a body or a person? So how do we deal with this? And how do we integrate this into a Catholic anthropology without either, going down the Hollywood dystopian apocalypse route that we've been given a steady diet of movies of, going back to 2001: A Space Odyssey, and HAL taking over, and you can multiply Hollywood movies that have used this, or saying that, well, no, AI is just the best thing ever, and it's going to make everything better. And so we should just let AI do as much as we possibly can with it and reshape our society, and reshape the way we interact with each other. I mean, somewhere between those vicious extremes, we've got to find the virtuous mean to say that no, and Pope Leo has already said, AI is a tool, it's a human artifact with a lot of potential, but it has a lot of potential to do harm as well. So we've got to think about this really seriously as Catholics, and how we integrate this into our anthropology and into Catholic social teaching.
Is that something you're going to write on?
It's something I'm trying to get up to speed on. Basically, I'm teaching a doctoral seminar right now called The Body in Theology, and we start with St. Paul, and we end in the 21st century by reading Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant theologies of the body, and we hit some patristic thinkers and medieval thinkers along the way. But now I've included a book, the last book, I'll be reading it alongside of my students, is how do we start to engage and think about AI from a Catholic perspective? Because there has been a working group in the Holy See working on these issues for the past couple of years. A couple of former students of mine have been part of that. So I'm trying to educate myself, basically, because this is something we all need to start thinking about.
So when you're in this topic, are you thinking like we end up having robots and they're like our slaves? I mean, they do all the work around the house and we don't have to treat them well. And like, is that one of the issues that your mind goes to?
I mean, I think there's all kinds of issues that and already we're getting.
I'd love a robot who can do the chores. By the way, I'm just saying. But,
your kids might love it too.
They
Connor.
need to grow up and have discipline. But when they go to bed, I could still have the robot do some more chores. It'd be nice.
I mean,
but if they're looking at you, and if they look like a robot, like a little metal thing, that's one thing, like a walking garbage disposal. But if it looks like a human,
yeah,
and it sounds like a human, and it says, Master, can I have the evening off, please? I need to recharge. I'm like, get to work. I mean, that's.
Right. So in other words, what's the impact on the human being? But in terms of how that trains us to relate to those around us, who don't just look like humans but are humans. But then there's other things, like what does it do to our workforce if we let more and more robots displace human beings who need jobs to support their families? What does it do to students in classrooms who are like, ChatGTP, I need a paper. I need you to write me a paper on this.
Yeah.
Right? So it teaches our students how not to get educated. Yeah. So there's all kinds of potential for, without going to the full Hollywood extreme, how we could misuse this really badly and damage ourselves in the process.
I think some theologians are going to have to start doing some work. And I mean, if the internet caused the increase in pornography use, imagine what AI and virtual reality is going to do for people. I mean, it's going to take it to a whole nother level, I would think.
And unfortunately it's already there. I mean, there are humanoid looking robots that people are using as sexual outlets, right? So yeah, that problem's already with us.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I never really would have thought of AI intersecting with theology of the body. That's an interesting I did not see that coming.
But one of the things we've been thinking about in philosophy for centuries, Connor, and I'm sure you know this, is the so-called mind-body problem.
Yes.
Right? How do we hold together that we are thinking, intelligent, self-aware subjects, but we're also embodied? How do we divorce those things and come down on one side or the other? No, we're minds, and then we have these appendages called bodies. Or no, we're matter that can think. Again, both of those are wrong, but the problem's been with us for a while. I think AI just kind of takes it to another level or exacerbates it in some ways.
Tan Books is here to help you become a saint. That's why we do everything we do. We publish thousands of titles, literally, that are specifically written to help you get to heaven. Everything from the lives of the saints to the writings of the saints, the greatest doctors of the church, the great spiritual masters, Alphonsus Liguori, St. Francis de Sales, and so on. So please come to tanbooks.com and find the book that God wants you to have right now so that you can get to heaven and be a saint for eternity.
So when, before Leo the 14th walked out, I had probably, of all the popes that I've read the most of, I've read Leo the 13th because of his social doctrine. And I've taught that at different levels and given a lot of thought to his social doctrine.
Yeah. And
then Leo the 14th walks out. And when he said Leo the 14th, or whoever said Leo the 14th, once I kind of could translate real quick what he said, my mind instantly went to Leo the 13th, and I started saying, well, there's a reason he chose a pope's name.
For sure.
They always know. So right out of the gate, my mind said, oh, he's going to do more social encyclicals on like automation and AI because it's another industrial revolution, and that's what Leo the 13th was dealing with.
You were spot on,
instantly,
Connor.
that was instant. And then secondly, I went, oh, he might be able to use or whatever social programs and what some people might consider more leftist ideology for taking care of the common man and that kind and kind of more welfare programs, or I'm not thinking of my words right now, but a little bit more of a progressive economic kind of way of seeing things, a little anti-free market. I started wondering, okay, is that the way he's going to go, and kind of using the anti-capitalist language in Leo XIII, which is there. I mean, there's no doubt.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I wondered which way he would take this, or both.
Right.
But I saw both of those. If you're taking Leo XIII's name, I could see you going down either path or both paths at the same time. Does that make sense to you?
It does. It does. And I suspect that's true. And I think we need to see a few documents from him to see which of those paths, or if in fact both of those paths are what he's choosing to do. But I would just qualify something you said a little bit, Conor, and that is, yes, is there anti-capitalist language in Leo XIV and in
13th.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. And sorry, my brain. Yeah. And in Pius XI, Quadragesimo Anno, of course there is, but there's also very strongly anti-socialist language.
Of course, yeah,
right. So,
and I think what they meant was
the third way.
It is.
Right.
When he said, when they were sorry to interrupt, but when they were anti-capital, and they were, they were, but they were using the word capitalism the way we would say libertarianism.
Yeah.
Capitalism today has all kinds of restraints, right? So I mean, like back then, capitalism did not have any restraints. So it was. They were talking industrial revolution, where like there's no child labor laws, there was no employee rights, there's no health insurance, there's nothing. These people were just
economic Darwinianism.
Absolutely. Yeah, perfect way to say it. That is not what we think of as capitalism today. There's regulation, there's red tape everywhere.
Sure.
And so we have a semantical problem.
Right, we do.
And so I've always thought that was a fascinating thing. And John Paul II's Centesimus Annus, right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, he's looking at this saying, okay, he's asked the question, does capitalism replace socialism, after the fall of or communism?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's like paragraph 42 or whatever in Centesimus Annus, he says, well, it depends what you mean. It depends how you define capitalism. Right. If it's a free marketplace that you just do whatever you want, no.
Yeah.
But if it's regulated by the state, then yes.
And ordered to the common good.
Yes.
Yeah. Then market systems better accord with the dignity of the human person and with human freedom than does the statist socialist approach.
Yeah. So like we're totally off transgender stuff.
We are.
But this is interesting because I think that that the automation that AI is going to bring about, it's got to cause a lot of layoffs. And I think it's different. Like I think there's a tendency to say, well, we've been through industrial revolutions and we've always thought that people were going to get massive layoffs, but this is different. And there have been massive layoffs, throughout history. So I'm afraid that the automation that Pope Leo XIV is going to be talking about is different in kind, and we're going to have massive unemployment. And then what do you do with these people who are made to work by their nature? Right. They have bodies, back to bodies.
Work is intrinsic to human dignity. Absolutely. No, I think that's right. I do think, though, that one of the things we don't see clearly enough is the Industrial Revolution, which did some good things, right? Because it made certain goods that were only available to the wealthy now available to middle class and working class people and families. That's a good thing. But it was devastating to families, right? Especially families who were working in the factories, because first thing it did is take fathers out of families and cause them to spend, most of their days working long hours for low wages. But then it didn't stop there, because women were pushed into the workforce because the families couldn't make it on just the husband's salary. And then kids ended up on the streets trying to earn money. So instead of families, we had places where people slept. So once the family was no longer a source of economic productivity, when we outsourced work from the family, then the family itself was destabilized in a very fundamental way, which set it up for the further destabilization of the sexual revolution, which hit new levels in the 20th century, and now our ongoing technology revolution, of which AI is part, right? So again, back to now we're getting back on track here, because I think you can think of Catholic anthropology, especially as articulated by someone like John Paul II, as a response to the challenges raised by the industrial, sexual, and technology revolutions.
The three revolutions. You have a chapter called The Three Revolutions. That was my next question. Take us through that.
I wanted to give you a segue.
That's perfect. It's perfect. So tell us about the three revolutions and how, and I guess these are predecessors to, I guess all of these have contributed to the the LGBTQ movement? Is that how you would phrase it?
Well,
or?
I mean, I think what they've all done in different ways is destabilize the family. And family is typically one of the key places where people get their sense of identity, their sense of self, right? So if family is destabilized because I never see my mom and dad because they're always working and I'm, a latchkey kid or whatever I am. And then there's this technology-powered sexual confusion around us because the sexual revolution says, you can have consequence-free sex because contraception will take care of it, right? And if your contraception fails, there's abortion. That furthers the confusion. So now we spend more and more of our times in digital worlds looking at screens in which we can reshape our appearance at will. Yes. We can change our avatar. We can change the way other people perceive us. So now we've got individuals who don't have a strong sense of self, who are confused because they don't have a intact family or they don't really have a family. They're in a culture that's awash in sexual confusion all around them, which creates further carnage in the families because we have divorce, we have abortion, we have, promiscuous sexual behavior run amok. And now we spend all this time in a world of screens. No wonder people are saying, well, I don't know who I am. Mary Eberstadt has a really interesting book, Primal Screams, in which she traces identity politics to the sexual revolution, because she says because the sexual revolution so damaged family and churches, two traditional places where people got their sense of self, the question of young people is, who am I? I don't know who I am. I don't know where I belong. And so they look for a group or a cause or a tribe to attach themselves to. And once they do that, once they become part of the group or the tribe, if someone criticizes your group or your tribe, they're not just having a political disagreement with you, they're attacking your identity. So this is one reason why our politics in general, but identity politics in particular, are so toxic, is because this is where people get their sense of self. But it's exactly that makes people vulnerable to gender ideology, because someone who's struggling with who am I don't know who I am, I don't know where I belong, comes across a chat group, an online source, maybe a friend group, which says, you know what, we can fix all that. You don't know who you are. We can address all this. And what the studies show is, whereas decades ago, the people showing up for gender transitioning were primarily middle-aged men who were unhappy with their life, so they decided they'd try to make themselves look like a woman to do something different. Today, it's primarily young people, more young women than young men, and a lot of these young people would show up on the autism spectrum. So these are people who are already feel like they don't fit in. They don't relate well to others. They're looking for a place to belong. And then they come across this set of ideas that says, we can fix all of that for you. You just have to take these steps, walk down this path, and it'll all go away. And you'll know exactly who, because you've been misgendered your whole life. And we can help you express who you truly are. So you mentioned it's almost like a social contagion, and it really is. And that's how it's spread over the last decade or so.
That's predatory. I mean, it's
totally.
When you think of a child predator, they look for the weak ones, and they go after that one, the one who's a little awkward, the one who lacks self-confidence, the one who's insecure, whatever, and they get them.
It's absolutely
and that's
predatory.
what the ideology, the woke ideology, is doing. I guess to victims, people who are already lost and confused,
right? And so some of these people are struggling with what we used to call gender identity disorder. Some of these people are struggling with identity for other reasons, but those are the vulnerable people. Those are the people who are getting picked off and swept up in this.
So I guess somewhat related to this, I did not even know that furries was a thing until like a year or two ago, maybe a couple years ago, and my daughter was telling me about it, and I literally thought they were pranking me,
Sure.
But
as kids do.
Right. But it turned, then I looked it up, and I'm like, oh, this is a real thing.
Yeah.
And it shows like I was very proud to be that clueless about culture. And, it's in a sense, it's a hilarious thing when you think about it. But then recently, Doctor, I was in New York City with my wife, and we're on a business trip up there. And we went to a museum, and I see a teenage girl, maybe college girl, I don't know, who's a furry, and she's dressed up as a cat. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I see her parents with her, and they're going around the museum, and it's very clear that it's their parents with this girl. And it went from being like this ridiculous thing that you just naturally laugh at to like, I felt so bad for these people. I felt so bad for mom and dad,
Sure.
I mean, it's like, and I have no idea. Maybe they're proud of their daughter. I got no idea. But my suspicion, maybe this is me just giving them the benefit of the doubt, but that these were two people who were horrifically embarrassed and worried about the mental health of their daughter, but were still going out on the town and still maybe on vacation, or maybe they were visiting there at college and they were taking her to a museum and maybe going to lunch, and like they're loving their, and I just was sitting here watching them, in a museum, like you stand in the same room for like 10 minutes.
Right.
And I'm watching these people, and I'm just sitting there, I'm like, I just was so broken up for these people because I'm like, I bet you these parents are seriously wounded, and being here right now with this girl is probably a major cross, and there's probably an act of love that they're willing to be with her. Humiliating. I mean, can you imagine having to go around with your, Paul, who works here, dressed up like a woman somewhere? I mean, what the heck? I mean, it would be, or as a cat. What if Paul thought he was a cat? I mean, so it's. Of course, it's funny, but it broke my heart. Yeah. Because you start seeing this is not just...
These are real humans.
These are real people.
Who are caught up in this, and they're externalizing and projecting their confusion to the culture around them. And I've come to learn more about furries lately as well. And weirdly, tragically, there's a whole sexual side of the furry subculture too. So it's not just like public costumes, right? So there's... Yeah, but in some ways, it's analogous to the confusion with transgenderism and gender ideology, because it's publicly displayed confusion. I'm not just going to be confused in myself and struggling in myself. I'm going to project this, and in the case of a lot of times with gender ideology, I'm going to demand that you acknowledge my confusion and treat me as I want to be treated, not as you, right? So people will say, you have to use my pronouns. You can't dead name me. You can't misgender me. I tell my students, when I teach undergraduates, I tell them at the beginning of every semester, because I teach courses in marriage and family, and these issues are issues I talk about in those courses. If you have a preferred nickname, I'm happy, for the most part, I'm happy to use a preferred name, a nickname, that's fine. I will not use pronouns to address you that do not correspond to the reality of your body. I will not do that. Yeah. And after...
You're participating in a lie.
Absolutely. I feel like, because charity has to be rooted in truth. And so it is not charitable to participate in someone else's delusion, falsehood, however you want to put it, because I'm not helping that person by doing that. That is not an act of charity. That's an act of capitulation. And since Unraveling Gender came out, I've been kind of the designated gender deputy on our campus. So if someone is like using pronouns, putting pronouns after their name or address when they're interacting with like prospective students, I have parents emailing me, and so I, contact the university president, and I'm like, we should not be doing this. This should not be part of. So
good for you.
Well, I mean, not on my watch if I can do anything about it.
That's amazing. You have a footnote in your book that tells a story about a 52-year-old father who lives as a 6-year-old girl. Do you remember this example?
I do.
This, again, it's a tragic thing, but like, what is that about?
And has adult children. I mean, can you imagine? You have adult children. I have adult children. If I suddenly decided, no, I want to be treated as a 6-year-old girl. I mean, my children would disown me.
Yeah.
And rightly so. No, so yeah, it's horrifying. But again, I'm not just, in a case like this, it's not just I'm confused and I'm struggling with whatever psychological issues, but I'm going to project these to the world and I'm going to demand other people accommodate my reality. It's solipsistic. In other words, it's like I'm the only one who really exists or matters, and I'm going to make reality revolve around me.
We were talking about this a little bit earlier at lunch, but the sports has put this issue on the map big time. Yeah. I mean, it's like until people had to watch girls get beat on the field very unfairly, or in the swimming pool or whatever, or on the court. Right. It was almost just like this crazy thing on the news,
right? But
then it became like unfair, and people now take it real seriously,
as they should.
Yeah. So, what do you have to say on the whole sports side of things?
It is the height of lunacy to think we should have physiological men competing in women's sports and call that fair competition. It's not. Women have their own leagues, sporting events, because they have a different set of physical abilities than men, and to put men into that mix it's grossly unfair. For me, one of the clearest examples of this is the whole college swimming situation, right? When the person who now describes himself as Leah Thomas swam as a man in college, he was ranked 462nd in the event in which he competed. When, after being on cross-sex hormones for 1 year, the NCAA said, now you can compete as a woman, Leah Thomas finished first in that event, beating out the best women in the field. Leah Thomas has the physical frame of Michael Phelps. So how on earth is that fair competition? It's not by any measure. So this is when it goes beyond, these are people who are struggling with their sense of self, their own identity. And I mean, we should have compassion for them, but when it's being imposed on others and creating blatant injustice like this, that's a huge problem. And thankfully, now there's some pushback from the current federal administration on this, and colleges and universities are starting to rethink some of their DEI policies on this, as they should, because as you said earlier, it's just common sense.
If you had a transgender student, how would you handle it? What would you, if you talked to them, like if they came to you, like what do you do? What do you don't do?
Yeah. Again, what I don't do is I don't use pronouns that describe them in a way that is false to the reality of who they are. So I will treat that person as charitably as I can. And if they're actually reaching out and looking for help, I mean, thankfully, there are some people out there, Catholic counselors who are grounded in a solid Catholic anthropology, who can help people work through the struggle that goes with, a form of dysmorphia like this, a gender confusion, in a way that actually is based in and respects the reality of the body of the person before them. So I'm happy to connect them. That's not something I do, right, but I'm happy to connect them to resources like that. But for me, the most important thing is to take the title of one of Pope Benedict's documents, Charity and Truth, right? Caritas and Veritate. We need both of those. So I need to be charitable towards someone who's struggling with a gender identity, but charity I try to show them has to be grounded in truth, or it's not genuinely charitable.
Yeah. How do you think that this is? We talked about the declines happening, like the number of people who identify as going down.
At least I've seen some recent studies that are indicating
that's
this.
good. How do you think this is going to look culturally in 10 years, 15 years? I mean, was this just a weird fad that we're going through, or is it here to stay?
I hope it is a weird fad. I mean, I hope the fact that you have secular governments around the world waking up and saying this is a bad model of medical care. We need to get back to evidence-based medicine. And I know there are doctors in the United States that won't kowtow to the current, bodies that are kind of setting the tenor here. But my hope would be we go back to reality and say that, yeah, sure, are there people who are struggling with gender confusion? Of course. Do those people need help? Of course they do. They need appropriate psychological care. They don't need medical care that's going to disfigure, damage, and distort their bodies and leave them just as confused and struggling as they were before all these procedures, and permanently medicalized to boot. That's a terrible model of medical care. So I'm hoping the pressure of other countries starting to kind of backpedal here, and the voices of people in the medical and psychological fields who have the courage to be speaking out about this are going to, start to turn the tide. That's a hope.
Would you say if this is a weird question here, if there was a patron saint for this whole issue, is it John Paul II?
I think you could do a lot worse than John Paul II. Sure. I think that's I'm trying to think of, is there a saint? And it's
a hard question.
It is a hard question.
I stumped him.
No.
Yeah.
I like John Paul II because the theology of the body, and we need to take the body seriously here. But I mean, what I'm also thinking of someone like Joan of Arc, right? Who actually dressed as a man to lead the French troops into battle, but in no way compromised her femininity.
Yes,
or Bernard of Clairvaux, who used imagery of to describe a male abbot as a mother caring for children, who, in other words, saw the way in which a man or a woman could embrace gifts or qualities of the other sex without compromising the givenness of their own physical reality and God-given identity. So if we could do that and it didn't come across as, it wasn't like it didn't send the wrong message, I think, because, we have such a rich array of saints, and some of the saints break the mold in terms of their culture and the expectations of their culture, but always in a way that's true to what God called them to do and what God called them to be.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And we were talking about Bernard, and he, in his commentary in the Song of Songs, he wanted to say that his soul is the bride to the bridegroom, who's Christ. And so there's that awkwardness of, you have a guy who is like putting himself in a feminine position in regards to the bridegroom. It's all allegory, but there is that oddness. But he was able to do so without sacrificing any of his masculinity.
Exactly.
And still able to see by allegory this beautiful femininity that he could offer to our Lord. And so that's an interesting way to look for the patron. That's a really good one, is somebody who's able
to kind of cross some of the quote unquote gendered boundaries of their time and culture in a way that doesn't undermine the God-given beauty of their identity as a man or a woman.
Beautiful. That's brilliant. All right. Well, we'll pray for their intercession. Anything else you want to say on this topic before we call it?
Let's continue. it may be that the pendulum's starting to swing back, that we're starting to see the turning of the tide. Let's pray that that's the case, because ultimately, I do think the deepest roots here are spiritual, right? This is a spiritual battle, and people who are confused about their own identity, more often than not, it's because they're confused about their relationship with God, and they don't know they have a Father in heaven who loves them. So if we can, pray for conversion within our culture, I think that's going to go a long way toward bringing us back towards something closer to common sense on this issue, and realizing that ultimately our bodies and our sexually differentiated bodies are gifts.
Yeah. Well, you're a great champion in the church, and to at least a good deal, a good extent, I should say, Scott Hahn was right. You're one of the more influential people in the church, and the way you've been fighting for truth and charity in your career and in all the ministries that you do. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah.
Conor.
All right. God bless you.
Thank you for all you do.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much.